Today's guest is Kathe Kline from Rock Your Retirement. Kathe was a financial advisor to the middle class since the 1990s and noticed that some people who had very little money were having a good time, staying healthy, and enjoying life, while some people who were very wealthy were not enjoying life and getting very sick. She started to question, what's the difference? Isn't retirement supposed to be all about money? Kathe also noticed that on average, when a large lump sum of money that one of her clients had saved all their lives was left to a beneficiary, that money on average was gone in 18 months. She started to tell her clients, rather than leave a bunch of money to build memories with the beneficiaries. Money doesn't last, but memories stay with you. We're going to chat with Kathe about what makes for a great retirement. Kathe and I are of a similar age, and it's around our generation that the rules of the previous generations for work, life, and retirement changed dramatically, and a new set of rules apply. I wanted to talk to Kathe because even though the rules are constantly changing, we need to figure out what a happy retirement looks like, especially for those of us who decide to achieve freedom early. Let's hear from Kathe. Welcome to Richer Soul, Kathe. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it, Rocky.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much for being here. As I went back and I looked at your history, I saw that you used to be a financial planner to the middle class in the past, and now you have a website and a podcast called Rock Your Retirement. And on that website and podcast, you talk about everything but money, which is what everyone usually talks about, retirement. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came to be?
Well, over the years that I was a financial advisor, I had found that, and I did have some wealthier clients, but the majority of my clients were middle class. And I had found that you could actually have a good amount of money and not have a good retirement. And you could have a small amount of money and have a great retirement. And I was trying to think, well, what is it? What's the difference between the people with money that aren't having a great retirement and the people with no money that are? And so I started doing some research, and it turns out that it's retirement lifestyle. So the people that do well in retirement are the ones that take into consideration what they want to do in retirement, and they're taking in consideration their health and other things like that. So, Rocky, that's what I looked at, and I thought, wow, I need to get the word out because so many of us were just planning on the money aspect.
I think that's very true. That's what most financial planners just focus on, the dollar amount. They never talk about what your life is going to look like. And as I have conversations with people, I always say to them, you need to have something to retire to. If you don't have something to retire to, you're probably not going to have a happy retirement. So what was it that those people who had something to retire to, what did they do differently when they were younger, or how did they think through a process so that they had something to retire to?
Well, a lot of them have some kind of a mentor that, they looked up to, an aunt, an uncle, a father, mother. And that's what I like about your show, Richer Soul. You're kind of like, I kind of think of you as the retirement yogi. That's kind of what you're doing with your show. You're giving people things to think about, wouldn't you say?
It is. For me, it's all about the thought process behind why you do something, the mindsets, the habits and the actions that you take, and to actually take the time to think through something before you go do it, and maybe to investigate and experience if that's truly what you want to do. And I think a lot of times people find they thought they wanted to do something, but then they found out it wasn't what they expected.
That actually happened with one of the episodes that I did. I don't remember the show number, but it was You Can Retire at Any Age. And it was a woman that I interviewed, and she and her husband had always wanted to move to Costa Rica. And so they went to Costa Rica to check it out, and they wound up buying a house. I mean, and they wound up saying, okay, let's move. I mean, who does that, right?
It's
And
pretty
so,
bold.
yeah. And so they went ahead and moved, and she loved it. She had had this high powered job in Los Angeles, and he had been working as well. But the thing is that she loved it more than he did. And she's still there, loving her retirement, and he's not. They wound up getting a divorce. So, one of the things that they didn't do, even though it's a happy story on her end, one of the things that they didn't do was really talk through what they were going to do. He wound up really not finding a social aspect there. You know, there's not that many Americans that live in Costa Rica, although there is a community. She wound up creating her own social life. She created her own club, basically, of Americans, and they would get together and do things. And he didn't. You know, he sat around and watched TV and really wasn't enjoying his life. You know, you can only surf so much. Part of it was his dream was to live on the beach. He wanted a beach bar and he wanted to be able to live on the beach. And she didn't have that same dream. And they wound up buying a house, I think it was in the mountains. And so I don't know them personally. She was a guest on the show, but I think that had something to do with their divorce. You know, his dream retirement was not the same as what they wound up doing. So those are some of the things that you need to think about when you retire, and talk to your spouse about it too. It's, you know, because it's a joint retirement if you have a spouse. And so those are one of the things that I learned while doing the show.
And I think I've seen somewhat similar in that a lot of times one spouse is working very hard and the other spouse may be more home with the kids or may have a more flexible schedule. And the spouse who's always working is never around. When they retire and all of a sudden show up at home, that probably causes a whole different world as the other person's normal routines get out of adjustment. And they both have to readjust. I know you've talked about how I think a lot of people get divorced in retirement, and that was kind of surprising to me. Have you seen other examples of that?
Well, certainly I've had a couple of people on the show talking about how to stay married after you get retired, or, you know, while you're thinking about it. And some of the things that they've said is that you really need to have conversations prior to retirement. And really, it's 18 months to 2 years before you retire. And you need to nail down what your perfect retirement life looks like and what your spouse's perfect retirement life looks like. What I've noticed is that a lot of women get resentful when their husbands who've had, and it can be male or female, don't think of me as sexist, I'm just talking about my own personal experience, that when their high-powered husbands who have been, you know, working 60 hours a week, all of a sudden they're home all day. And the wives don't know what to do with them. You know, they've had this social life that they've had for years, and they've had the place to themselves for years. And then all of a sudden, someone who wasn't there is now there all the time. So what do? You know, a lot of times these high-powered executives don't have a social life outside of work. You know, they might have golfing buddies or something like that, but certainly not somebody who's going to be there to fill 8 to 10 hours a day. And so these are things that you really need to discuss with your spouse. What does your retirement look like? What are you going to do with your retirement? Is your dream retirement to sit around and watch, you know, reruns of Sister Wives? Or is it to go out and play golf? Do you want to volunteer? What is it that you really want to do? That's the question you have to ask yourself.
And in speaking to that, I guess I've heard some different stories about this. I know that I think when I was younger, and probably a lot of people have that vision, you know, when you retire, oh, we sit around, we play golf, we travel, we go to the beach. But then I've also heard a lot of people say that after a year or two of doing that, boredom kicks in. And it's not as exciting as you spent your whole life thinking it might be. Whereas I see people who kind of start, I'm not going to call it a second career, but who have something they've always wanted to do, and they just start working on it and doing it and engaging in it, tend to be much happier in retirement. And the surprising thing is some of those people make a lot more money in retirement than they did while they were working. Have you seen anything like that in your travels?
What you said is really quite true, Rocky. And I don't know if the listeners to Richer Soul are, looking to start a second career. I really don't think of it as a career. I think of it as a passion project. It's when you're at a certain point in your life or your investment, when you have enough money to where you don't have to work and yet you choose to, that's a passion project. And I think that we really need to come up with a new word because retirement doesn't do it. That is an old school word, don't you think, Rocky?
I think so. I think for me, the new definition of retirement for me is being able to choose what you do with your day. Not necessarily that you're going to stop working. It's just that you choose how you work and what you work on, and not so much that you're working for someone else, but working for yourself or whatever it is that you're passionate about.
Absolutely. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be your own business. I mean, there are people rocking their retirement and they might be a greeter at Walmart. And I know that sounds funny. Like, oh, that person's here because they need the money. Not necessarily. Sometimes those people that greet you at Walmart are there specifically for the socialization and specifically because they get to, see a bunch of people in the day. And, you also see the same kind of thing at Starbucks and other places where there's a lot of interaction between the clientele and the staff. Have you ever met somebody who worked at Starbucks or one of the other places that didn't really need to work and they did it out of, because they wanted to have people in their lives?
I have met people like that. Most of them are clearly now they're much older. At this point, they're probably in the 60s and 70s. And I think they're of a different generation than the younger people in the sense that I think the younger listeners and the younger people want more than just that. And I probably don't know how best to explain it. And I think they also have more opportunities to do things with the advent of, you've got the internet, you can blog, you can podcast, you can create your own courses, the ability to publish a book today. You no longer have to wait for someone else to pick you and your book and say, yes, we'll publish this. You essentially can write your own book and publish it and do it for very little on your own and have it listed on Amazon. So I think people have more opportunity than ever to do their own thing as well. And I think more and more people are trying to take that path instead of waiting to 65. And actually, for my generation, it's 67. And now they're probably talking even longer, is to figure out a way to create a life that you don't want to retire from much earlier on in your life. That's what I hear a lot more from people. Have you encountered people who have retired much earlier?
Well, most of my listeners are in their 60s. Well, some are in their 50s, but I would say mid to late 50s, 60s, and 70s are the people who listen to my show, Rock Your Retirement. And just a little side note, whenever I say Rock Your Retirement, people think I'm saying your name, Rocky, Rocky Retirement. And I'm like, no. It's Rock Your Retirement, not Rocky. But I would say the majority of my listeners are probably in that age group where, they graduated from college, they got a job, they worked at 1, 2, 3 jobs throughout their careers, maybe 7 jobs, but most of them worked a couple of jobs. And then they save money in their 401ks, or they had a government job or they had a pension, and then they retire. That's the majority of my listeners. I would say the listeners to your show are probably a bit younger than mine. So if you're listening to this and you have an aunt or a mother or somebody who, is in that older age group, send them over to my show. But yeah, I would say there is a difference in the age groups and what people want. I would say I do agree that I am seeing the younger generation less satisfied with that strategy of going to college, graduating, and getting a job, saving forever, and then retiring. I think you're right.
I don't think I can't say that they're less satisfied. I think the opportunity for that to occur and for the ability for them to do that no longer exists, in the sense that how many companies can you go start with and spend your entire life there and have a pension? I mean, those things, that path worked in the past, and amongst most of your listeners, it's probably a path that was possible. But for younger people, I don't think they see that path as even viable anymore. And I think as the world changes rapidly, you're going to see people having to face that even more and more, that you're not going to be able to stay somewhere for a long time and build up that retirement through a pension, or you can with a 401k, but you've got to be diligent and you've got to save high amounts of money. Otherwise,
and not cash it out when you want to go on vacation. Right?
Yeah, you can't cash it out when you want to go on vacation.
But you know what I'm saying? People want to cash out their retirement because they see that money. They're like, ooh, I've got $15,000 in there. And ooh, I've got a $10,000 debt. Why don't I cash out my 401k and use it to pay off my debt? And then what they don't realize is, because they didn't change their habits, 2 years later, they have just as much debt as what they did before. And so you're right. The younger generation does have a different path than my generation. But on the other hand, my generation didn't really do a lot of saving. The majority of people don't have money saved. And so the younger generation has the opportunity to start doing something now, even if it's just a small amount. And I think the entrepreneurial spirit, which is what you're noticing, is also the same spirit that people will want to take care of themselves. There's nobody now that's going to take care of you except you, right?
Absolutely. That's very true.
And I think the listeners to Richer Soul are, they're aware of that, and that's why they're listening. So kudos to you, Rocky.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So you've dealt with a lot of people as a financial advisor in the past, and were you able to help people change their habits and mindsets from constantly wanting to cash out? I mean, it's hard to do something today that doesn't provide a reward today, but provides a reward 30 years in the future. I mean, that's a long time to wait for people. How do you help people shift their focus so that when they look at doing something today and saying, I'm not going to go out and buy this, I'm not going to take this fancy vacation, or I'm not going to make this particular spending decision because I want freedom in my life tomorrow? Have you found any helpful ways to help people overcome that in the moment? I want it now.
I'm not, so I just want to be real clear. I'm not a full-time financial advisor anymore, even though I still maintain my licenses, and I don't really market that business. But when I retired from that business, or semi-retired, I had over 1,400 clients, and I still have my licenses, and now I have about 30 clients. So over the years, I had become increasingly frustrated with people. And that's one of the reasons why I retired. I would get so frustrated when I would have a client who made over $100,000 a year and refused to save and would buy a new car every 4 years or whatever and move into a house that was too expensive for them and have no money. And when these people would retire, and my clients, I would say, would average between about 60 and 100,000 a year. I had a couple that made 200, but that was my average client. and they'd retire. And, I would work with them for years saying, you got to save more money. My average client had about $35,000 saved. And I didn't know what to say. And some of these people, they would have $60,000, $70,000 saved. And then they would retire and they'd say, well, I want to take $10,000 and go on vacation with that money. And I'm Rocky. I can't relate to people who are, in my opinion, irresponsible in that manner. You've got your retirement is going to last a very long time. People are living now to be in their hundreds. And my dad always told me, save 10% of what you make and put that money away and don't spend it. So my thought was, you give 10% to the church, you give 10% to yourself, and you live on 80%. And I've had debt in my life. I had to pay down some debt when I was in my 20s. I took out loans and had credit card debt and did all the wrong things. But I got out of it. And I would say the number one thing that, if you're talking finances, number one thing that people can do is get out of debt. Don't use those credit cards. Don't, pay for your car on debt. And I know that's difficult to do. I've had I still to this day buy used cars. The car that I have now, I bought new, but the reason why I bought it was because I wanted a car that runs on battery. And they didn't, when I bought mine, it was the first year that it came out, the Prius. And, we paid cash for it because my car was 12 years old. So when you're not buying a new car every couple of years, you can really save a lot of money. And then when it's time to buy a new car, you can pay cash. So that's me on my soapbox.
I think most of my audience is the same way. They understand stay out of debt and to live on less than you earn and to save that difference. And for me, 10% to me is a minimum. I know I talk about J.D. Roth. J.D. Roth said save half. Somewhere in between there, I think, is a number that people need to focus on. The 20s and the 30% is a good number to save. And the good thing, the more you can save, the less you spend, the faster you can retire. So you don't have to wait till 65. You can retire in your 40s then because you've saved up a good chunk of money, which is pretty amazing. As to your client, honestly, if they were in that situation, I think I would tell them to take the $10,000 vacation. Enjoy the memories because they're the last ones you're going to have. Your retirement's going to be, I at that point, I don't know. What happens to those people?
I know. What do you do? Now, I can tell you that the clients that I have remaining, most of them I've been working with for years, and they took my advice. And so, I have one client that has thanked me on numerous occasions because I met her when she was in her early 20s and showed her how to save. And now she's got plenty of money, and so she's going to have a great retirement because she listened when she was in her 20s. It's so hard when you're in your 20s to listen to that. You're like, I just want to go buy a 6-pack of beer. I just want to go out with my friends. I want a new car. I want to go skiing. You've got so many things that you want to do when you're young, and retirement seems like a million years away. So I do understand, but to me, whether it's 10%, 20, whatever, I always did 10% until I could, do more. And I'm with you. I did put away more, but ever since I was in my teens, I would put away that money and didn't spend it. And so that's what grew, and that is what allows me to have the freedom that I have today.
And I think that's what people have to realize is the more you hold off today, the faster you can have freedom. And that's a wonderful thing to have. And at the same point, I think, I know there's a big crowd out there that are extremely frugal. And I'm not part of that crowd. You can still go out, but figure out a way to go out for less. You can still go buy a 6-pack, but figure out a way to do it for less. and save that small difference. If you go out and you spend $100 with your friends, or you go out and you spend $50 with your friends, I'm going to bet that your happiness differential is very small between those two nights out, and one of them puts $50 more in your savings for tomorrow, so that when you're 40s and 50s, you can do what you want. I think Dave Ramsey says, live like nobody else so you can live like nobody else. And that's what I've kind of followed.
That's great advice for your Richer Soul audience. I love that. It's fantastic.
So just out of curiosity, these people who don't save, what does their retirement usually look like?
Well, usually it's a struggle for people, but there are things that you can do. If you have no money and you retire, and I don't want to tell your audience that they don't have to save, because obviously your life is going to be much different if you have the ability to do what you want to do. But there are some things that you can do. Number one, you don't have to stay in your same town. Okay, I live in San Diego, very expensive. I would say the average house here, just a regular house, not a nice one, is, I think it's $550,000 here in San Diego area. So the houses here are very expensive. If you are living in an expensive area and you have a home, or let's say you're struggling to pay the mortgage on your home, you've got one of those expensive homes, you can move. That's an option. There are places in the United States where you can get a home for, $200,000. Much, much different than where I live. So there are things that you can do to make it so that it's not a struggle. Another thing that you can do, and this, people are going to boo-hoo me, but you can get a roommate. Okay. Now, if you're struggling, you can get a roommate. So there are some things that you can do financially if you've waited to retire. But, if you've waited to save and you just can't do it, there's not enough time, you can do that. But the issue is, Rocky, don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until, foreclosure is happening and then you don't have the option. Everybody needs to think ahead. And I think that's what your show's about. Thinking ahead, whether it's financially or retirement lifestyle, like what I talk about on my show. But if you think things through and think ahead, you're going to have a better life.
Absolutely. And we talk a lot about the compound interest curve and how it does over time bend upward. And once it bends, it's amazing where it goes. But it takes a long time to get to that point. And people have to make small little steps. And every little step towards it gets you there. And it really sets you up for an amazing retirement, an amazing early retirement, an amazing life as you take that journey there as well.
Absolutely.
Since we're talking about retirement, just a quick question. Some people may want to sit down and do a retirement budget. And I don't think people really think about the cost of healthcare in their retirement. Do you have some helpful advice of how much someone should budget towards their health care? Even though they're on Medicare, there's still a lot of other costs involved. What should someone budget towards that when they retire?
Well, from what I've seen, reading the different articles, is you should budget hundreds of thousands of dollars. But let me give you an example. Medicare itself right now, Part A is, free if you've paid into it for 10 years or more. Part B currently is $134 a month. And you're saying to yourself, oh, wow, I wish I could only pay $134 a month. And yeah, me too. I mean, I'm not on Medicare either. Then on top of that, you're either going to buy a supplement plan or you're going to get Medicare Advantage, which is basically your HMOs. And that will give you a cap on what you spend. And for your listeners that, have an aunt, an uncle, a mama, somebody who wants to understand the differences between those two plans, I do have a free class that people can take. Do you want me to give out that website?
Sure, absolutely.
So you would go to MedicareQuick, QUICK.com/course. And the class that explains the difference between Medicare Advantage and Medicare Supplement is called Making Medicare Decisions, and it's 20 minutes. So you don't you don't have to take all the classes that are inside that course. And so I would recommend that if people are interested, that they would take that. But where your costs on Medicare are going to be potentially outrageous is in your medication. So Medicare doesn't pay for medication, or Medicare Part D is the insurance, it's basically the Medicare insurance that you buy to cover your drugs, but it doesn't work like our drug plan works. They have something called the donut hole. And if you're interested in learning about the donut hole, you can take that class as well. But basically what it says is that once you and the insurance company have paid a certain amount, your costs go up. And for example, my father has Parkinson's disease. Basically, his medication is about $5,000 or $6,000 a month. And he would hit that donut hole very, very quickly. I have seen clients who have cancer, and their medication costs for them is over $10,000 a year. And so the medication can be extremely expensive. I just did a quote for somebody who has cancer, and we asked the doctor what the potential drugs could be. And so he gave us a couple of them, and we looked them up to make sure that my client was on the right drug plan. And the retail costs of the drugs is over $250,000 for a year. My client, if he winds up going on these drugs, his cost is going to be over $10,000 a year, his portion. So the drug costs can be quite expensive. So Rocky, your listeners are younger. Everything about Medicare is going to change by the time they retire. I don't know what Medicare is going to look like. It changes every year. So the main thing is to make sure that you are saving enough money so that you do have the option. I mean, state programs can help. There are programs that can help very low-income people, but regular middle-class people, they don't really have they don't have those resources that very low-income people have. Does that make sense?
It does. And thank you for sharing that. I want people to, again, just think forward and see what's going to happen in the future and be prepared for that. And that's one of the big costs, both if you retire early and then once you get to Medicare, is the cost of healthcare. It's become astronomical for many people.
Well, if you retire early, you're not eligible for Medicare. So how are you going to fill that gap?
And I think for a lot of people right now, that's a major issue because the cost of health insurance is quite high. And there's entire shows upon shows upon shows on just this very topic. It's
crazy. I know. I don't qualify for Medicare, and my insurance policy that I pay for, it's a high deductible plan, and I pay almost $5,000 a month. So it's 5,000. No, 500. 500. You have to watch me, Rocky. You have to watch what I say. No, $500 a month, not 5,000. But that's a lot of money.
And that's for just you or for you and your husband?
Just me. My husband's on Medicare.
Okay. So a younger retired couple would spend $1,000 at least.
Yeah, I'm 51. Okay. So, and this is one of the least, it's one of the least expensive plans that fit my needs. It's an HMO. This is the first time I've ever been on an HMO, so we'll see how it goes.
Good luck.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up, is there anything else I should have asked you about or anything else that you would like to share?
Yeah, I would say that as you get older, and for your listeners, this is really for them to deal with their parents and aunts and uncles. As you get older, really one of the things that you need to think about is your attitude. People who laugh and have a good attitude are going to have a better retirement than people who don't. One of my guests came on the show, and she's an author, and she wrote a book called Shake, Rattle, and Roll with It, Living and Laughing with Parkinson's. And so here she is. She has Parkinson's disease, and yet she's able to laugh. She's able to really enjoy herself, even though she has a horrible disease that is going to wind up probably killing her. So you can't control what happens to you health-wise a lot of the times, but you can control your attitude. And I would say that is one of the most important things that we talk about I have a little I don't know, I call it a freebie. It's a little book that I give away to people who want more information. Do you want me to tell people how they can get it?
Absolutely.
So it's called The Secrets About Retirement Your Broker Won't Tell You. And it's basically all the things that I learned in 2016. And I'll be updating it probably every year. And you can actually get a copy by going to rockyourretirement.com/richersoul.
Ah, thank you. Just for us. That's awesome.
That's right, just for you. And that's The Secrets About Retirement Your Broker Won't Tell You.
Excellent. And that's where they can find you as well, is at Rock Your Retirement. And you have your blog there as well as links to your podcast. Anywhere else that they should be looking out for you?
No, if they're interested in connecting, they can always go to the website, rockyourretirement.com, and my contact information is on the site.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rocky, and thanks to your listeners at Richer Soul.
It was great having Kathe on, and we learned that you do need to save for retirement over a lifetime. I think 10% will get you there, but you really have to start very young and work for a really long time. The more you can up that percentage, the faster you can have freedom. However, you do need to enjoy the journey, and we can make choices that still allow us to be happy while saving for the future. Please check out our site, rockyourretirement.com.